In 1943, P-38 pilots dreaded their own planes as much as the enemy. A fatal throttle lag was getting them shot down. Command issued manuals. An engineer, Major Strickland, said it was impossible to fix. But one mechanic, Eli Vance, didn't read the manual. He was about to prove one man's field ingenuity was worth more than 1,000 regulations. But before we dive into this, do me a favor and subscribe so you don't miss our next story. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm not a pilot. I don't have the education for that, the clean hands. My name is Elias Vance, Master Sergeant. And in the winter of 1943, I was in charge of keeping 30 P-38 Lightnings in the air over England, or at least I was failing to. You have to understand, we loved those planes. Back in the States, she was a miracle. Twin booms, twin engines, a 20mm cannon in the nose. The Germans even had a name for her, the Fork-tailed Devil. But here, in the cold, wet, miserable gray of the ETO, she wasn't a devil. She was just sick. I didn't fly them, but I listened to them. You learn more from listening than from flying. A pilot tells you what he felt. The machine tells you what happened. And my machines were telling me they were choking to death. It was always the same story. A young lieutenant, maybe 21, 22, would land his ship, shaking so bad he could barely unclip his harness. He'd come find me before he even went to debrief. This time, it was Lieutenant Miller. We called him Kid. "Sergeant," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He was trying to light a cigarette, but his hands wouldn't cooperate. It happened again. I knew what it was. I didn't even have to look at the engine cowlings. "Tell me," I said, handing him my own Zippo. I was bouncing a flight of 109s, had one dead to rights. I pushed the throttle forward for the kill, and nothing. He looked at me, his eyes wide. "Nothing, Eli." It was like the engines just took a deep breath and thought about it. For a second, maybe two. He took a long drag. "You know how long 2 seconds is up there?" The 109 rolled, and by the time my engines finally woke up, his wingman was on my tail. I dove out. Barely. I just nodded. I grabbed a rag and wiped grease off my hands that wasn't there. The lag. "It's not just a lag, Sarge. It's a coffin nail." I walked over to his plane. Lightning Bug. She was beautiful, but she was a liar. I climbed up the ladder and ran my hand along the supercharger intake. It was ice cold. Of course it was. The P-38 was a technical marvel. It had General Electric turbo superchargers that were supposed to be fully automatic. They were smart. They had sensors and regulators and aneroid bellows that were supposed to adjust the fuel-air mixture perfectly for any altitude. A miracle of engineering. A miracle designed for the warm, dry air of California or the Pacific. Here, in the damp, freezing skies of Germany, that smart regulator was a liability. The cold air was making the sensors lie. When Kid Miller pushed his throttle forward, demanding power, the regulator got confused. It thought the engine couldn't handle the pressure. So instead of giving him power, it protected the engine. It choked it. I spent weeks reading the technical orders, the manuals. They all said the same thing. Unit is sealed. Do not tamper. The engineers back in Dayton, Ohio, had decided that this was a problem of pilot discipline. Pilots must advance throttles slowly, one memo read. Slowly. I wanted to find the man who wrote that, drag him out of his warm office, and put him in a cockpit with a Focke-Wulf 190 on his 6. That evening, I was in my office, a corner of the hangar blocked off by empty oil drums, staring at a spare regulator. It was a beautiful piece of aluminum, all complex and perfect, and utterly useless. The base commander, Colonel Harrison, found me there. He was a good man, a pilot's pilot. "Vance," he said, not even looking at the regulator. He was looking at the duty roster, at the names we'd already crossed off. "The reports are getting loud. Command is sending an engineer from the States, a Major Strickland, to find out why the 479th can't perform to expectations." I didn't stand up. You tell him to bring a new engine or a new sky. I'm serious, Eli. They think it's us? They think my men are cowards or your men are lazy. I finally looked up. Sir, with respect, my men are working 20-hour days, swapping out engines that are fouling plugs faster than we can clean them, and your pilots are the bravest kids I've ever met. They're flying a broken machine. Then fix it, he said, his voice quiet. How? I motioned to the regulator. The book says I can't. The book says this thing is smarter than I am. It's tamper-proof. The book, the colonel said, wasn't written at 20,000 feet over Schweinfurt. The book isn't getting shot at. He turned to leave. At the edge of the hangar light, he stopped. This Strickland, he's not a pilot. He's an engineer. He lives by the book. Don't show him anything stupid, Eli. I watched him walk out into the rain. Stupid was relative. Stupid was watching another kid like Miller die, because a memo told him to advance his throttle slowly. Stupid was trusting a machine that was trying to protect itself when it should be protecting the man flying it. I looked back at the regulator. Sealed, tamper-proof. I picked up a wrench. We'll see about that. The problem was impossible. The solution was forbidden. And in the middle sat me, a mechanic who was getting damn tired of sending young men out to die. Major Strickland arrived 3 days later, and he was exactly what I expected. He didn't come in a muddy Jeep. He was driven in a clean staff car. He wore a pristine Class A uniform, even in the middle of a workday, with a sharp crease in his trousers that defied the English damp. On his collar, he wore the insignia of the Army Air Force's Materiel Command. He wasn't a warrior. He was a custodian. He spent the first morning in the colonel's office drinking coffee and looking at reports. I saw him through the window, nodding, pointing at charts. He wasn't looking at the planes. He wasn't talking to the pilots. He was reading numbers. By noon, I'd had enough. Kid Miller had just come back from a milk run, a simple patrol, and his engine pressure log was all over the place. I was cleaning his spark plugs, my hands black with grease and soot, when Strickland's shadow fell over my workbench. "Master Sergeant Vance?" he asked. His voice was crisp. "High Eastern." I didn't turn around. "Major?" "I am Major Strickland. I'm here to review the performance deficiencies of the 479th. I finally stood up, slowly. I'm a big man, and I made sure to tower over him. I held up the spark plug I was working on. It was caked with black carbon. "Deficiencies, Major? This plug has 6 hours on it. It looks like it came out of a tractor. This isn't a performance deficiency. This is a design deficiency." Strickland's eyes narrowed. He was offended. Offended that I was dirty, that I was blunt, and that I dared to question the wisdom of the engineers back home. "Your job, Sergeant, is to maintain the equipment as specified, not to critique it." "My job," I said, stepping closer, "is to keep those kids," I pointed to the pilot's ready room, "from dying, and your specified equipment is failing at that job." "Colonel Harrison warned me about you," Strickland said, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. "He said you were a tinkerer." Let's be clear. Tinkering is what causes accidents. The P-38 is the most advanced pursuit plane in the world. The General Electric regulator is a masterpiece of automated engineering. The problem, Sergeant, is almost always the human element. That was it. That was the line. "You're wrong, Major." I walked him over to Lightning Bug, Miller's plane. I had the engine cowling off. "You want to see the human element? Look at this." I pointed to the turbo supercharger assembly. "It's beautiful," he said, almost sighing. "A work of art." "It's a piece of junk," I said. "In this air, at this temperature, this masterpiece is telling the engine to lean out when it should be rich. It's cutting boost when the pilot is begging for it. It's a coward, Major. It's programmed to save the engine. I'm trying to save the pilot." "And what?" Strickland asked, his voice dripping with condescending patience. "Is your tinkerer's solution?" This was my moment. I knew it was a mistake. I knew Colonel Harrison had warned me, but I had to. I owed it to Miller. I pointed to a small, empty spot on the firewall. "A switch," I said. Strickland just stared at me. "A switch. A manual bypass. A toggle switch wired straight to the wastegate. We cut the regulator out of the loop completely. When the pilot is in a jam, he flips it. He gets direct, manual control of the boost. All of it. Right now." The Major looked at me. He wasn't just confused. He was horrified. He looked around as if he was afraid someone might have heard me. He lowered his voice. "You want to bypass the single most sophisticated and expensive component of this powertrain. You want to give a 20-year-old pilot, in the middle of a high-G turn, with cannon shells flying past his head, direct manual control over 60 inches of manifold pressure." "Yes, sir," I said. "He'll blow the engine." "Maybe," I countered. "But he'll blow it after he shoots down the 190. He'll blow it after he gets away. Right now he's getting shot down with a perfectly protected, perfectly intact engine. I'll take the trade." Strickland's face turned red. He stepped back and pointed a clean finger at my chest. "You are an enlisted man, Vance. You are not an engineer. You are not a pilot. You are a mechanic. And you will not modify government property. You will not endanger those pilots with your hot rod impulses." "Hot rod?" "That's exactly what this is. It's irresponsible. It's sabotage. You're talking about turning a $10 million aviation program into a high school drag race." He snapped his notebook shut. "My findings are clear. The 479th isn't suffering from mechanical failures. It's suffering from a lack of discipline, both in the air and, apparently, on the ground." He was walking away. "Major," I called out. He stopped. "Don't you want to win?" I asked. He turned back, and the look he gave me was pure ice. "Wars are won through logistics, Sergeant, through standardization, through following the manual. Your proposal is not just ill-advised, it is an offense. It is officially rejected, and if I even suspect, that you have tampered with a single bolt on any of these aircraft, I will have you court-martialed and sent to the stockade so fast your head will spin. Is that clear, Master Sergeant?" I watched him march back to his clean staff car. I stood there for a long time. The manual, standardization, logistics. He was right, of course. That's how you win a long war. But that's not how you survive a 5-minute dogfight. He hadn't just rejected my idea. He'd rejected them, the pilots. He'd signed his name to their death warrants, all in the name of a clean report. I looked at the empty spot on the firewall. I looked at the regulator. And I looked at the hangar door, where the shadow of a new P-38, a replacement for a pilot who didn't come home last week, was being wheeled in. Strickland had given me an order, and I decided right then and there that I was going to disobey it. Orders are a funny thing. You spend 20 years in the service learning to obey. You learn that the system is bigger than you, that the book is the book for a reason. You learn to trust the brass, the engineers, the men with the college degrees. But the system wasn't in the hangar that night. The book wasn't covered in grease. And the engineers weren't listening to Kid Miller's P-38 backfire and pop on the taxiway, a sure sign the engine was running too lean. He'd almost been hit. Again. This time, it was a flak burst. He'd been on a strafing run, low and fast. When he'd pulled up, he'd needed power to escape the gunners on the ground. He'd shoved the throttles. And the engines had coughed, just for a second. But at 200 feet, a second is an eternity. The plane had wallowed sluggish, and a burst of 20-millimeter flak had stitched a line of holes across his left wing. He landed shaking, but this time he wasn't just scared, he was angry. He found me by the fuel dump. "It's me or the plane, Eli," he said, not even bothering to salute. "One of us isn't coming back next time, and I think it's me." I just looked at him, a 22-year-old kid from Ohio who was already resigned to dying. That was the moment. The book could go to hell. Major Strickland could go to hell. And if I went to the stockade, so be it. At least I'd go knowing I'd tried. I told the colonel that Miller's plane, Lightning Bug, had a critical turbo-manifold issue and needed to be grounded for 48 hours. Then I told my own crew to take the night off. I told them I was running a full diagnostic myself. But Sarge, my best corporal, said, "We can help." "No," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "This one's delicate. I don't want anyone else's hands on it. Go, get some sleep." They left. By 10 p.m. the hangar was empty, just me, the Lightning Bug, and the sound of the rain. I turned on the overhead work light. It cast a circle of harsh white light like a stage or an operating table. Regulations be damned. I went to my junk pile. Every mechanic has one, the parts that are too broken to use but too valuable to throw away. I found a toggle switch from the instrument panel of a wrecked B-25. It was heavy-duty, built to last. I found a length of shielded wire from a Jeep's ignition system, and I found a small, red indicator light from a bomber's landing gear panel. I got to work. Strickland had called me a hot rodder. He was right. For 2 hours I just sat in the cockpit, tracing wires, reading the original schematics. I wasn't just bypassing the regulator, I had to do it cleanly. I couldn't have it failing and taking the whole electrical system with it. I ran my new wires behind the main instrument panel, using the existing looms, making it look like factory work. I mounted the toggle switch in a small empty panel spot, just below the throttle quadrant. It was a spot where Miller's hand would naturally rest. I wired the switch to the wastegate solenoid. On meant the regulator was bypassed. Off meant the plane was back to book spec. But that wasn't enough. Miller was right. He couldn't watch the sky and the boost gauge at the same time. I needed to give him a warning. That's where the red light came in. I drilled a small hole right in the center of his gun sight. Support. It was an ugly, brutal, illegal thing to do. I was mutilating a piece of priceless equipment. I wired the little red light to the manifold pressure gauge. If the pressure went above 60 inches, the "you are about to blow up" line, that red light would fire up right in his line of sight. A hot rod idiot light. I sat back. The switch was in. The light was set. It was the ugliest, most dangerous, most beautiful thing I'd ever built. It was 3 in the morning when I finished. I was cleaning my tools, wiping every surface, destroying the evidence. "I thought you told everyone to go home, Sergeant." I froze. My heart hit the back of my throat. Kid Miller was standing at the hangar entrance, silhouetted by the rain. "What are you doing here, Lieutenant?" I asked, my voice flat. He walked into the light. He wasn't wearing his officer's cap. He was just a mechanic's son from Ohio. I couldn't sleep. I knew you were up to something, the way you looked at me today." He walked over to the plane. He climbed up the ladder. He slid into the cockpit. He was in there for a long time. I just stood on the ground, waiting. Finally, he spoke. "There's a new switch." "It's nothing," I said, "just testing a circuit." "And a new light, right in the gun sight. Eli, what did you do?" I sighed. I was compromised. He had me. "Climb down, Lieutenant." He did. He stood in front of me, his flight suit smelling like old sweat and new fear. "You're right," I said, keeping my voice low. "It's a new switch, and it's a court-martial for both of us if anyone ever finds out." I explained it. The bypass, the total control, the danger. "This isn't a gift, kid. It's a hand grenade. You flip that switch, you are the regulator. You, not the smart machine. You look away for 2 seconds, you'll blow the cylinder heads right off the block. You'll turn that $200,000 engine into a boat anchor. You'll probably kill yourself." He looked at the plane, then back at me. "Does it work?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "It works on my workbench. I don't know what it'll do at 20,000 feet." He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Good. Because I'm tired of dying." "There's one more thing," I said. Major Strickland. He finds this. I'm in the stockade. You're probably washed out, sent to a desk for the rest of the war. He won't find it, Miller said. He will if you come back with your engines blown to bits. You can't be a cowboy, Miller. This is a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. You use it to get the kill or to get away. Then you switch it off. You come back to base by the book, you understand me? You never use it unless you're about to die. He looked at my hands, covered in grease from his plane. I understand, Sergeant, he said. He wasn't a kid anymore. When do we test it? Soon, I said. Soon as the weather gives us a window. Now get out of here and wipe that look off your face. You just came in to check the flight schedule. Got it? Got it, Sarge. He walked out. I watched him go, then turned off the hangar light. The forbidden innovation was done. Now all we had to do was see if it would save a life or take one. The weather check was the oldest excuse in the book. 2 days later, the rain broke, giving us a ceiling of gray, bruised clouds at 15,000 feet. It was just good enough to fly, and just bad enough to keep the bombers on the ground. It was perfect. Strickland was busy in meetings, trying to convince the bomber crews that their engine fires were also a discipline problem. He was nowhere near the flight line. I signed the maintenance log for lightning bug myself. Engine run-up and systems check. Pilot, Lieutenant Miller. It looked official. It was a complete lie. Miller climbed into the cockpit. He was all business, running through the checklist like it was any other flight. But I saw his hand, when he thought I wasn't looking, tap the side of the instrument panel right where the new switch was hidden. He was reassuring himself it was real. I stood on the ladder, leaning in. Remember what I said, Lieutenant. This isn't a joyride. You're not a hot rodder. You are a test pilot. Find the edge. Don't go over it. Just find the edge, he repeated, his voice tight inside his oxygen mask. Got it, Sarge. And that light, I said, tapping the gun sight. That's not a suggestion. It's a stop sign. You see red, you back off. Or you're coming home in a parachute, if you're lucky. He nodded. See you in 30 minutes, Eli. He closed the canopy. The Allisons barked to life, one after the other. He taxied out, and I just stood on the hard stand, my stomach in knots. I felt like I'd just handed a live grenade to a child. He took off, a clean, normal, by-the-book climb. He disappeared into the low clouds. All I could do was wait and smoke. 20 minutes passed. It felt like 20 years. Every time I heard an engine, I looked up, expecting to see a contrail of black smoke or the bloom of an air rescue flare. Nothing. Then I heard it. A sound I'd never heard before. It wasn't the usual drone of a P-38. It was a high-thinned, terrifying scream. It was the sound of 2 Allison engines being pushed to their absolute screaming limit. A silver streak tore out of the clouds, almost vertical. It was Miller. He wasn't just flying. He was attacking the sky. He pulled the P-38 into a climbing roll, and the power... My God, the power. He hung at the top of the roll, weightless, and then fell back, diving at the field. He pulled out at the last second, his wingtips streaming vapor, and screamed across the runway at treetop level faster than I had ever seen a P-38 move. He pulled up, circled, and landed. It was a rough landing. He bounced it twice, hard. He taxied back to the hangar and cut the engines. The sudden silence was deafening. I ran to the plane. I was expecting to see him cheering, triumphant. I climbed the ladder. He had the canopy open. He'd ripped his oxygen mask off. He was pale as a ghost, and he was shaking so hard he couldn't unbuckle his harness. Eli, he whispered, it's too much. I looked over his shoulder at the instrument panel. My heart stopped. The manifold pressure gauges, both needles were bent. They were jammed, pinned all the way past the red line. He hadn't just touched the edge. He'd flown right over it. What happened? I asked, my voice like gravel. I did what you said. I got to 10,000 feet. I flipped the switch. He took a deep breath. I nudged the throttle, and Eli, she just exploded. the acceleration. It threw my head back. I've never felt anything like it. It was like being strapped to a rocket. "The light, Miller," I said, pointing. "The red light." "It came on," he said, his eyes wide. "It came on instantly. I saw it. But, I don't know, I wanted to see what she'd do. I kept pushing, just for a second. The light was just solid red. It was screaming at me. Then I heard a bang from the right engine. I jumped down and ran to the right engine. There was a long black streak of oil down the side of the boom. He'd blown a gasket. I climbed back up. I was furious. "I told you it was a stop sign, you damned fool. You're lucky you didn't blow the whole cylinder head off. You're lucky you're alive." "I know," he yelled back, his voice finally cracking. "I know. It's not a scalpel, Eli. It's a monster. I can't control it. No one can. I was watching the sky, and then the light, and then the gauge. It's too much." I saw it then. He was just a kid, and I'd given him a monster. I had failed. I'd built a death trap, just like Strickland said I would. I leaned against the fuselage. I had failed. "So," Miller said, his voice quiet now, "what do we do? Do we take it out?" I looked at the oil streak. I looked at the terrified pilot. And then I looked at the bent needles on the gauge. He'd pushed it until the engines banged. And he'd still made it home. The P-38 had held together. The tweak worked. The pilot had failed the test. "No," I said, a new idea forming. "We're not taking it out. You're going back up." "What? Eli, You nearly blew it. You're right. Because you were a cowboy. You thought it was a magic button." I grabbed his flight jacket. "Listen to me. You don't watch the gauge. You don't even look at it. You forget it exists. You watch the sky, and you watch that light. That's all. That light is your new god. It's your new regulator. You push the throttle until the light flickers. The second it flickers, you ease back. You ride the edge, kid. You don't fly over it. You ride it. You make that light flicker, you keep it just on the edge of on." I could see the understanding dawning in his eyes. "You make it flicker," he repeated. "You fly with the light. You make it your wingman." "Now," I said, climbing down. "Fuel truck, get this thing refueled and get me a new set of pressure gauges." An hour later, the lightning. Bug was patched up. Miller, his face grim, climbed back in. He was gone for 20 minutes. When he came back, it was different. He didn't scream over the runway. He didn't bounce the landing. He set the P-38 down on the numbers like a feather. He taxied to the hangar, shut down, and sat in the cockpit for a long time. I walked over. I didn't say anything. He opened the canopy. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't pale. He was smiling. He just looked at me. "The lag, Eli." "What about it?" "It's gone," he said, that smile spreading. "It's just gone. The lag is gone. The fork-tailed devil is finally here." The test was over. The innovation was proven. And we had a secret. A terrible and wonderful secret. Now, we just needed the Germans. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of hell. Strickland had finished his investigation and filed his report. The official verdict: pilot error and maintenance indiscipline. He'd grounded 2 other pilots and had half my crew pulling extra duty, cleaning latrines, all for improper maintenance logs. He was making an example, but he couldn't ground us all. The war didn't stop. And the biggest mission of the ETO to date was just called Schweinfurt again. 1,000 men, 1,000 planes, heading deep into the heart of Germany to hit the ball-bearing plants. It was a mission we all knew was a meat grinder. The bombers would be crawling with Luftwaffe fighters from the second they crossed the coast. Our job in the 479th was close escort, a job that meant you were a target. I was on the hard stand before dawn. It was cold enough to see your breath, a heavy, wet cold that got into the bones. Miller was flying Lightning Bug. As he did his walk-around, I pulled him aside, pretending to check his oxygen mask. "Remember the rules, kid," I said, my voice low. "Ride the light, Eli," he said, his voice calm. He had changed in the last 2 weeks. He wasn't the kid anymore. I won't let you down. It's not me you have to worry about. You come back, Miller. You hear me? You come back. He just nodded and climbed into the cockpit. Major Strickland was there, of course. He was standing on the little observation deck of the control tower, coffee mug in hand, watching his clean, unmodified, by-the-book P-38s take off. He wanted to be there to see his disciplined Air Force in action. The 479th formed up and headed east. The field was quiet. All we could do was wait and listen. The radio was a mess of static and calm, clipped reports. Fighters climbing to 25,000, crossing the coast. Bandits, 2 o'clock high. And then chaos. The radio just exploded. Yelling, screaming, men calling out for their wingman. I'm hit, I'm hit. He's on my tail. Get him off, get him off. I was in the maintenance tent, but the tower had the loudspeaker on, broadcasting the entire fight. Strickland was still up there, listening to the results of his standardization. I couldn't take it. I ran out onto the field, staring at the empty eastern sky as if I could will them home. The battle raged on the radio. Mayday, Mayday, Duchess is going down. Where is my escort? God, where are they? Then I heard Miller's voice. Calm. Too calm. Red Flight, this is Miller. I've got 2 on my 6. Can't shake 'em. I'm breaking left. Now. Then another voice, his wingman. Kid, no, he's still on you. It's an ace. He's got a yellow nose. A yellow-nosed Focke wolf, an Abschuss cannon, an expert, a man who hunted P-38s for breakfast. I could picture it perfectly. The German pilot, a veteran, sitting 50 yards off Miller's tail, lining up the kill. He wasn't in a hurry. He knew the P-38. He knew that if Miller tried to firewall the throttles to escape, the engines would choke. He was just waiting for the lightning bug to wallow, to present the perfect, slow-moving target. Strickland was on the tower deck, his binoculars now pointed east. He was listening to the same radio. "Break, Miller! Break!" his wingmen screamed. Then Miller's voice again, no static, just pure, clear transmission. It was almost a prayer. "Eli, forgive me." And then just silence. My blood went cold. No. What was that? I heard his wingman. "Kid? Miller? Where are you? Holy." I looked up at the tower. Strickland was frozen, binoculars pointed at the sky. The wingman's voice came back, but now it was pure, screaming awe. "Did you see that? Did you see that? He's going vertical! He's going vertical!" On the radio we couldn't hear Miller, but we could hear the sounds of the fight. And all we heard was a rising, screaming howl that drowned out everything else. Here's what Miller told me later. He saw the FW-190 in his mirror, the yellow nose bright against the gray sky. He knew the German was toying with him, waiting for the lag. He saw the tracers float past his canopy. The German was just walking his fire in. Miller said, "Eli, forgive me," and he flipped my switch. He shoved the throttles to the firewall. There was no lag, no hesitation, no choke. 1 second, the P-38 was a target. The next, it was a rocket. The idiot light in his gun sight didn't just flicker, it blazed a solid, angry red. Miller didn't care. He was riding the edge, and the edge was behind him. The German ace, anticipating a slow, wallowing climb, was suddenly faced with an airplane that exploded forward and up. The lightning bug, now supercharged with 70 inches of raw, unregulated manifold pressure, pulled into a vertical climb that no FW-190 on Earth could follow. Miller said he just hung there, 2,000 feet above the German, the P-38 shuddering, the engines screaming like banshees. The German ace, shocked, confused, had stalled out, his own plane falling away, a perfect target. Miller flipped the lightning bug over, came down from the sun, and didn't even have to aim. He just pushed the button, and the 20mm cannon in the nose turned the yellow-nosed Focke wolf into a cloud of black smoke and falling parts. "Bandit down!" the wingman screamed over the radio. "Miller, bandit down! You're smoking!" Miller didn't answer. He was busy. He dove on 2 more 190s that were tearing his wingman apart, used the impossible speed to make one head-on pass, and sawed the wing off a second German plane. The rest of the German flight, seeing this single fork-tailed devil appear out of nowhere and execute 3 kills in 40 seconds, did the one thing no one ever expected. They ran. The radio was silent again. Then Miller's voice breathing hard. "Red flight? Red flight? I'm a little hot, coming home." That's when I finally unclenched my fists. My fingernails had drawn blood from my palms. The air war over Schweinfurt was over, at least for the 479th, and my hot rod had just won it. An hour later, we heard them. First, just a handful of specks on the horizon. Then, the sound of P-38s, tired and low on fuel. They came in 1s and 2s, not in the smart formations they'd left in. Several were trailing smoke. 2 were missing entirely. But then I heard a new sound. It was Lightning Bug. She was whistling. Both engines were overheating, the metal screaming, and she was trailing a thick black plume banner of oil smoke from the right engine, the one Miller had almost blown during the test. He was the last one in. He cut the line, dropped his gear, and put the plane on the runway, hard. He didn't have time for finesse. I was in a Jeep, racing the crash trucks to his hard stand. But Major Strickland got there first. He was standing there, in the middle of the hard stand, as Miller's smoking, ticking, battle-scarred plane rolled to a stop. Strickland's face was white. He wasn't an engineer anymore. He was a priest watching a heresy. He was ready to have me arrested. He was going to have me arrested. Miller shut down the engines. As the propellers spun to a stop, the other pilots swarmed the plane. They had landed and just abandoned their own ships, running across the concrete, yelling, pounding on Miller's fuselage before he even had the canopy open. "What was that, Miller? How did you do that? I saw you. You were like a rocket. My God, kid, what the hell is in that plane?" Miller finally opened the canopy. He was drenched in sweat. He unclipped his mask, looked at the crowd of pilots, and then looked past them, right at me. I walked through the crowd. They parted, and I stood at the bottom of his ladder. He just looked at me. I looked at the engine. The gasket I'd patched was completely gone, blown to pieces. Oil was dripping, sizzling on the hot exhaust manifold. He'd pushed it all the way. He'd held the red light and flown it home. "You're leaking, Lieutenant," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She runs a little hot, Sarge," he replied, that smile just touching his lips. "Sergeant Vance!" Strickland's voice cut through the air like a whip. I turned. He was pointing, not at me, but at the plane. "What did you do to that aircraft?" he demanded. Every pilot went silent. They all turned to look at the major, and then they all turned to look at me. It was Colonel Harrison, the base CO, who answered. He stepped out of the crowd, pulling his own helmet off. He'd been flying with them. "What he did, Major," Harrison said, his voice deadly quiet, "is save my entire squadron. I was Red Flight's wingman. I saw it all." Strickland looked at Harrison, his own commanding officer, and his certainty wavered. "Sir, this man has illegally modified—" "This man," Harrison cut him off, "just gave us a P-38 that can fight. The debrief is in 1 hour, Major. I suggest you be there. I, for one, want to know what Sergeant Vance's illegal modification is, and I want it installed on every plane in this group by 0600 tomorrow, including mine." The pilots cheered. A raw, ragged yell. Strickland's face, for the first time, showed something other than arrogance. It showed confusion. His book had been torn up, set on fire, and thrown in his face. He looked at me, at the smoking engine, at the cheering pilots, and then he just turned. He walked away, shoulders slumped, back to his clean staff car. He was at the debrief. He sat in the back, taking notes, as pilot after pilot got up. The 190s were all over us. I was dead, he was on my tail, and I had no power. Then Miller came out of nowhere. I've never seen a P-38 move like that, ever. And finally Miller, who just said, I had the power when I needed it. That's all. Later that night, I was in the hangar. I was starting the long, impossible job of tearing down Miller's ruined engine. I was exhausted, but I was good. You'll need a new set of manifold pressure gauges for this one, I imagine. It was Strickland. He was standing in the shadows. He wasn't wearing his formal jacket. He was just a man in a khaki shirt looking at the wreckage of my tweak. I didn't stop working. Maybe? He walked closer into the light. He looked at the engine, then at the cockpit. May I? I just grunted. He climbed the ladder. He leaned into the cockpit. I could hear him breathing. He saw the ugly little hole in the gun sight. He saw the heavy-duty toggle switch from a B-25, a switch that didn't belong. He saw my hot rod wiring. He climbed down. He had a smudge of grease on his clean shirt. He was quiet for a long, long time. He looked at the engine, at the tools on my bench, and then at me. He was a man watching his entire religion collapse. All my reports, he said, his voice barely a whisper, all my studies, the fluid dynamics, the stress tolerances, everything said this was impossible. Everything said it would explode. It almost did, I said, pulling a blackened, warped piston from the engine block. But it flew. He nodded. He looked defeated. And then he straightened up. The major was back, but he was different. Master Sergeant, he said, pulling out his notebook. The same one he'd used to threaten me. I am going to file a supplementary report. I tensed. Is that so? Yes? A field expedient solution to atmospheric-induced engine lag. I'm going to need, he said, and I could hear the grinding of his pride, a technical schematic for my report. He held out a pencil. I looked at him, at his clean hands, at his notebook. He wasn't arresting me. He wasn't court-martialing me. He was asking me. I wiped my own hands on a rag, took the pencil, and tore a clean page from my own maintenance log. A schematic, huh? I said. It's not real elegant. War, Strickland said, watching me draw the simple circuit, is rarely elegant, Sergeant, but it should be effective. I handed him the drawing, the Vance manifold override, as the pilots started calling it. It was never official. It never made the book. You wouldn't find it in a single regulation. But by the end of 1944, you'd have been hard-pressed to find a P-38 in the entire ETO that didn't have a mysterious, extra toggle switch on the dash and a little red light by the gun sight. Strickland's report called it a minor adjustment. The pilots, they just called it the Eli. My name was never in a history book. I never got a medal. But that wasn't the point. The point was the sound. The sound of those lightnings taking off, not as sick planes, but as the screaming, vertical climbing, fork-tailed devils they were always meant to be. I was just a mechanic. But I'd listened to the machine, and for the first time, it had finally told me, thank you. And if this story of ingenuity under pressure made you think, share your own thoughts in the comments. We'll see you in the next one.